Ready when you are. Good evening. Welcome to Allegedly with Ashli Ford. I am going to continue into the Regina Rowe Hicks case tonight. For disclaimer purposes, I am not law enforcement, and the amount of weight that you put into this is entirely up to you. This is based on my own investigations. Up to you. I am a little bit under the weather today. My voice is a little scratchy. Sometimes while I'm investigating these cases, they take a toll on me. I have multiple sclerosis, and today is just one of those days. Regina Rowe Hicks was a 25-year-old mother when she went missing on October 18th, 2001 in Huron County, just outside of Willard, Ohio. He's fine. Her body was located in the passenger seat of her own car that had been submerged in a pond about a mile from her intended destination, and it was discovered on October 22nd. Regina had intended to pick up her 4-year-old son from her estranged husband, but allegedly failed to arrive. That's where we're going to pick up. Since last week, I've had the opportunity to look at the Camaro that Regina's body was found in. The family was told that the car no longer existed a few years back, but that's simply not true. The car remains in the same location that it was originally towed to in 2001. The car is white. It was purchased with Regina's cut of the insurance money from a fire at a home that Regina and her estranged husband lived in for a short period of time on State Route 99. There was a brief reconciliation just a few months before Regina's body was found, and that house burned to the ground very suspiciously. I'm told from a source very close to Paul that her estranged husband used his electrical skills from the railroad to set that fire intentionally in the bathroom. If you followed along in this case at all, you see that fires seem to follow this man. Regina's mother passed without ever knowing what happened to Regina, and for the remainder of her life, she investigated what happened to her only daughter. Her family allowed me to have the entirety of her work. I'm fairly confident that I'm very likely the only one that's ever had access to it, because the briefcases that this investigation that she had that were located in had to be sawed open. Regina's mom's name was Lucella, and she was hot on that trail. I firmly believe if she had had access to the same things I have today, like public records and social media, that she very likely would have solved it. She asked a lot of questions that I have since been able to find the answers to. Her mother believed that the fire was a key component to why her daughter died, and I certainly believe that it played a very large role. I want to talk about the car. Previously, it was reported in newspapers that the car was found because the trunk had popped open and had become visible in the pond that it was submerged in. Like is common in this area, the news is often wrong, and they appeared to have been wrong frequently in this case. As the cases remained open, the records are sealed. However, I have since learned that the car was completely submerged in the pond at the intersection of Town Line Road 12 and Section Line 30, almost directly beneath a train yard where her estranged husband and the man who was with him that night, where they worked. I initially wondered if that area, because of the train yard, was busy. However, I have since learned that the train yard hub had been essentially moved farther away from that intersection not long before Regina's body was located. Additionally, I was told by several employees there that at midnight it would have been completely isolated due to a shift change. And I'm told that that's something that the estranged husband and his friend would have been aware of. I've been told by a source very close to the estranged husband that Gates, the friend whose property Regina was en route to, lied to the police when They asked him what time he went to work that night. He claimed that he left the property at 8:45. However, that does not appear to be true. He was seen freshly showered around 10 p.m. and not at work. He was, in fact, with Paul at another location. If you remember, I noted that the story about him being at work was not followed up on by the police, specifically not in the police report, and that really bothered me. I couldn't understand why that wouldn't have been verified. It should have been very easy information to verify. I have confirmed through police reports that the man was an informant for the police in 2001. He was also the same man who called in the report that Regina had drugs in her car shortly before she went missing, something that she was never charged for. Since that time, multiple people have come forward to confirm that that call was indeed a setup to make Regina look bad, specifically that the drug scale that was found in her trunk was provided by someone else. One day after Regina was reported missing, her husband filed for divorce and for custody of their young son. The report was stamped by the court. I actually have the original document here, compliments of Lucella. It was stamped October 19th, 2001 at 3:31 p.m. The child's address, this becomes important if you follow. The child's address was listed as the home of Regina. That's important because a couple of the newspapers reported that Paul had custody of the child prior to Regina going missing, and that is inaccurate according to Paul's own divorce filing. Paul, in his filing, very interestingly, claimed two addresses. In the very first address, he claimed the same address as Regina. Later in the the filing, he claimed that he still lived at State Route 99, the house that burned entirely to the ground. The devil is always in the details for me, and I questioned why he would file this. It seemed insensitive that he would file this as she was reported missing. Paul's mother claimed that this was something that had been filed weeks prior and that it was filed through an attorney. It does appear to have been filed through an attorney's office due to the public notary that signed it. I verified what office she works for and that, in fact, they did represent Paul. However, it was sworn to and subscribed the 17th day of October. That would be 2 days before she went missing. 1 day before she went missing. I call bullshit on several things in the information that was provided to me by Paul's family and also the news media. In a podcast 2 weeks ago, we talked about this lengthy police records for Paul Hicks, including several domestic violence events. Interestingly, in number 7 of this affidavit, Paul claimed that there was only one domestic violence event and that he wasn't convicted. Now, that's important because it says, this is the question, are you now or have you ever been a party to any criminal or civil case or any investigation concerning child abuse, child neglect, or domestic violence? If so, state each court case, case number, date, and nature of the outcome of the case. He lists 1 from 99. There definitely were more police reports than that. I believe, based on later events, that the motivation for Regina's murder was very likely this custody case. Again, if you follow the previous podcast, you will note that Paul goes on to concoct very elaborate schemes to gain custody of his subsequent children. Now, hindsight's 20/20, and they definitely wouldn't have known that then, but we know it now. Also in Lucella's records is a document showing that on October 31st, 2001, mere weeks after Regina's body was found in that pond, that her young son was removed from school by Paul. I found that very odd because her son was at the location that Regina was en route to when she went missing. The same location that I'm told by a source that Regina died at. Now, that information is not necessarily true. And when questioned further, that person said, well, they thought that she was dead there. I'm told that Regina was bashed over the head with a shovel and dragged through the woods at the Town Line Road 12 property. Paul said in a newspaper article that same year that he and his son were riding four-wheelers at the Town Line Road 12 property. However, the police reports very clearly document that he claimed to be digging a pond at that location, one that never materialized. I'm always concerned when people's stories change or don't necessarily match up. You don't have to remember the truth, but you do have to remember a lie. When people can't seem to keep their story straight, it indicates that the person is very likely lying. I was worried that the child may have been removed from school out of fear that he may talk, especially about what happened that night and if he saw anything. More concerning were these very concentrated efforts by Paul to keep this child from visiting with Regina's family. After she was missing and then subsequently found dead, Paul and Lucella engaged in a brutal custody battle. It spanned several years. Lucella, according to her handwritten notes that I have, died without ever being allowed to see the child again shortly after her daughter passed. I want to go back to the car. Regina's death was ruled a drowning, which is why I am told that they thought that she was dead at the Town Line Road 12 property. She was found to have absolutely no drugs or alcohol in her system at the time of her death. Even Paul's mother confirmed that she did not do drugs and rarely drank in a police report. I'm told that Paul used a portion of his money from the 99 house fire to pay someone to kill Regina. I'm told that he never paid up because it didn't go as planned. I'm told that one of the 5 wounds on her head, the one that I believe to be the most severe, was caused by the shovel. That wound appeared at the back of her skull, and according to family members who identified her body, it had split entirely open. There were at least 4 other very significant blows to her head, causing bruising and swelling, and bruising to her wrists. Her body was covered in dirt like it had been dragged. The coroner said her injuries were not consistent with a car accident. I surmised that the car was put in the pond in hopes that it would never be found. But if it was ever found, that they would hopefully determine that she had died as a result of a car accident. I believe that it was the intention to perhaps frame Regina's current boyfriend for being the driver, because Regina was located in the passenger seat. The boyfriend, by all accounts, had been dropped off at his home. He seems to have an airtight alibi for that night and was questioned extensively by police. He actually was in police custody for quite some time after Regina passed for a completely unrelated event. I am unable to speak with him because he died several years ago in another state in what I'm told was a drug overdose, which seems to track. I spoke with some of his family members and some of his neighbors from that day. A source who claimed to be a suspect in this case told me a lot of the details that I've used to investigate this, though she attributed them to being caused by someone else. The car Regina was found in was said to have been located because the trunk had popped open and become visible. However, based on witnesses, I've determined that that is very likely untrue. The car was nose down in the pond, and the pond must have appeared more deep than it actually was. I say that because the car was vaguely visible to the owner of that pond, who believed the car to be a four-wheeler because he could only see the tail end of it. The trunk popped open when the farmer hooked what he thought was an ATV up to a tractor and attempted to pull it out by the spoiler. The car, like most cars, was likely found nose down due to the weight of the engine. It's pretty common and likely caused that car's tail end to float a little bit higher, making the farmer think that it was smaller than it actually was. The car car has an all black interior with the exception of the seats that has a red inlay to them. I know that because I've seen it. The car's driver's side window was down when the car was found, and it remains that way today. That's important, and it leads me to believe that the car was not towed into the pond. We had questioned early on whether this car was towed into the pond, pushed into the pond, or driven into the pond. I believe because that window is down that it was very likely driven into the pond. The window would need to be left down to let the driver out of the car. Otherwise, they would have had to wait until this car is completely submerged to equalize the pressure and allow that car door to be opened. Because that car door was found closed and the window was down, I believe that it's more likely that a person slipped through the window. Specifically because the person who claimed to be a suspect is very small. She is about my height, and she's a little heavier, but she's about my height. And at that time, she could have easily gone through that window. The driver's seat in the car is something that I talked about early on because I wanted to see what its positioning was. Paul is incredibly tall, 6'6" at least. The driver's seat is pulled up nearly to the steering wheel, and it is far too close to allow Paul to have been the one in the driver's seat. Not that I ever believed that he was, because from what I can find, he doesn't do his own dirty work. The self-described suspect, again, is much shorter. She's 5'3". That seat would have been at the perfect distance for her. I believe I could have reached the pedals from where the seat was at. I find it really odd as I'm looking into this car because the emergency brake is pulled. And that was something that initially I was like, well, okay, who pulls the emergency brake while they're driving this car into the pond, right? If that's their intention. Also, the seatbelt in the passenger seat appears to have been cut. That was likely done by the investigators who removed her body because you wouldn't want to tamper with the evidence. You would want to cut that. Because that emergency brake is still engaged, I believe that it was engaged when she went into the water or shortly after, and we're going to talk about that. Her mother claimed that she was strapped into the passenger seat. Because of the cut in the safety belt, I believe that to very likely be true. The passenger window does not appear to have been rolled down like the driver's side window was. The passenger window appears to have remained up. Again, these cars, when they're stored in evidence like this, they don't alter anything, they don't change anything, they don't touch anything. Not that they could. It appears to me that this car had power windows, and after being submerged in water for that long, it very likely didn't work. That also indicates that it was intentional, because this car was found in late October in Ohio, and it's pretty cold around here. I can't imagine why late at night. She was last seen sometime after 8 o'clock. I can't imagine late at night why she would be driving with her window down. It very likely happened just prior to the car entering the water, or very, very quickly afterwards. Because it was power, it would have shut that system down pretty quickly. That to me led me to believe that this was very likely premeditated. It seems like her being strapped into this passenger seat has thrown me for a loop since the very beginning. Because why the hell would you strap her in the passenger seat? If you want to make it look like an accident, you don't strap her in the passenger seat, right? It just seems odd. I suppose that they could have hoped that it would be blamed on the boyfriend at the time, but it still seemed strange. Especially because if they believed that she was dead, and I believe that she very likely was knocked, at least unconscious, that you wouldn't strap her into the seat. It's not like you're looking out for her safety. However, if they had to roll the window down to get out of the car, and if I'm correct, and this was something that was premeditated because the windows are power, They likely were concerned about her body floating out of the car. Even if the car was never discovered, if that window was open and the water became warmer, at some point she could have floated out. And I don't think that they wanted that to happen. There are a lot of heartbreaking details in this case, and I try to skip over any ones that I don't believe are pertinent to the case. But one that really stuck with me about this car is there's her hair scrunchie, and it's on the gear shifter. The car was a stick shift, and for some reason that like dead stopped me when I saw it, and I had to catch my breath from it. There's even like beads and an air freshener hanging from the rear view mirror. When I'm doing these cases, I try really hard to just look at the facts and just look at the details. But for some reason, when I see something like that, it makes it really hard. It makes it really difficult for me to not remember that this is not just a case, but a person. And that scrunchie on the gear shifter, it really stuck with me. Why I was looking that close is because someone had told me that after Regina went missing, but before her body was found, that they had cleaned up change, like coin change, on the floor of the garage at Town Line Road 12. That bothered me because I think that that is the most efficient place to store a car on that property until it could be moved to the pond. When I looked, into this car, what I noticed is there was no change, none. Now, yes, the car went into the water. It does not appear to have hit the water hard or fast because it wasn't heard. And change doesn't float. So I would expect to have seen it, especially because she had just gone shopping. I mean, immediately prior to dropping her boyfriend off and heading to get her son, she had just gone shopping and she used cash. So I expected there to be change. It adds a little bit of credibility to this person's story that they cleaned up this change all over the garage. Additionally, that person said that Paul said that they were going to pin Regina's murder on him, but she hadn't been found dead yet. And that's something that bothered this person quite a bit and for a number of years. The woman who I'm told has confessed to multiple people in the past about Regina's death, she was married at the time. However, I know that she was carrying on a sexual relationship with Paul, and I cannot find any evidence or people who claim that her husband knew about that. That becomes interesting. I don't know that she would want him to know about it, specifically if she thought that she were about to collect money as a result of her actions that night. She, by all accounts, is this. I mean, she's a hustler, for sure. When she told me a few weeks ago what happened to Regina, she claimed that it was Paul and an underage girlfriend that had actually committed the acts. But the way that she told me the story led me to believe that it was in fact her. Also, the underage girlfriend that was named was a small framed girl, and she had already been popped in the face by Regina weeks prior, according to police records. Regina was 175 pounds at the time of her death, and from what I'm told, she was strong as hell and a fighter, according to family. She held her own with Paul over the years. The female suspect that I'm talking to in the last couple of weeks, she's ceased conversations with me, is smaller framed. And she's known to not fight fair. She is said to have used bricks and bats and weapons in her fights, and there's a lot of that documented. Plus, she knew an awful lot about what happened to Regina while claiming that she did not know Paul or Regina at all. She is the one who initially told me that Regina had dirt found in her back pocket. That was something that I was not aware of, but when I spoke with family, it is a detail that was released to Regina's family. I'm also told in the last couple of weeks by 3 separate members of Paul's family that he confessed to them, but that he claimed to have paid a woman suspect, that specific woman suspect that I'm talking about, and her husband to do the job. That's odd to me, given the fact that the woman gave me, a very similar story, but she attributed it to Paul and the minor girlfriend. It seems to me like both of these people, Paul and this woman suspect, have confessed to this crime over the years to more than one person. However, they conveniently change out their names in exchange for someone else. Last week, we talked about the women's shoes that were found at the scene where Regina's car was pulled out of the pond. Let's think about that for a minute. Have you ever fallen into the lake fully closed? I have. Climbing out is not fun. The shoes usually are a hindrance. They weigh you down. And from what I am told, they became incredibly muddy on the way out. Additionally, Paul claimed shortly after Regina went missing that his muddy boots were stolen from the porch. Listen, muddy shoes are not like wet, muddy clothes. They are going to transfer a shit ton of evidence from that pond. If you remember last week, those shoes were an issue for the woman suspect, given that her feet were particularly small. She was said to have confessed to multiple people, once while drunk, which is something that you can't necessarily consider. But the other 2 times, she appeared to be sober. She also, according to friends of the woman, checked herself into a mental facility shortly after Regina went missing. She claimed it was due to the shoes being found. This lady is, when I say a hustler, I mean it. She is no dummy. She is very keen on the law. She comes from a family who is similar to my own in the fact that they get in trouble quite a bit. I thought last week that it was very likely that she felt that the police were onto her and she checked herself in, I don't know, as a way to get out of it. She did claim to have been questioned repeatedly about the murder. She also claimed to have wired up on Paul, despite earlier in the conversation telling me she had never met Paul and Regina. Paul was incredibly muddy and wet the night that Regina went missing. His clothes were soaked. The woman suspect also claimed to have found wet, muddy clothes hidden behind the washer in her home. When she told me that story, she attributed them to her former husband, but I believe that they were likely hers. I think that she very likely told me that to take suspicion off of her, as I was starting to suspect her a little bit more. Her husband later went to prison for breaking her neck, and I think it gave her plenty of reason to hate him and implicate him later. I want to talk about the emergency brake being engaged, and Regina's cause of death. Her cause of death was, in fact, drowning. And that leads me to believe that it's possible that Regina did, in fact, at some point when she hit the water, regain consciousness. Not sure what's going on with the light. It's a little strange. The woman suspect told me that Regina was hit over the head with a shovel And that is the injury that I believe occurred to the back of her head. Excuse me. I believe that she was taken by surprise because of it being on the back of her head. I want you to hear me out. We're going to surmise a little bit here. At the beginning of the very first podcast, I talked about Regina, why she didn't regain consciousness when she hit the water. The water was cold, and I would have expected her, even with the injuries being as severe as they were, to regain consciousness unless she was in fact in a coma. If she regained consciousness when she hit the water, it would fit this woman's story that they believed her to be dead, but that she wasn't. The Camaro was a stick shift. Anyone who has ever driven that type of car knows that the emergency brake is like a second nature thing for you. I have to wonder if Regina, delirious, and maybe recently regaining consciousness because of the cold water, if she pulled it, not realizing that she was already in the water. I think that it very likely could have been a habit of hers if she drove stick on a regular basis, which I'm told that she did. There's really no other explanation for that emergency brake to be engaged. Because I know for a fact that Paul's clothes were wet and muddy, I have to wonder if the other blows to the head happened after she hit that water. I have to wonder if Paul, who was not driving the car according to that seat, jumped in to knock her out again. The woman suspect is not a fisticuff fighter like Regina was. She took cheap shots. She used bricks and bats, things that, she didn't throw fists. She didn't throw hands. The woman suspect is also small compared to how Regina was at the time. And I believe that Regina very likely could have overpowered the woman even if she was injured, because adrenaline's a bitch. I believe that at this point, it was likely that Paul would have had to jump into the water and knock Regina out. I think that it is very likely that it was then that Regina was buckled into the car to prevent her from floating out. Nobody's going to bother buckling a woman into a seat that they believe is dead because, she's not going anywhere. That window being open presents a problem. Now, a manual car's emergency brake is often engaged when it's towed on a flatbed truck, like Regina's car was. However, when this car was towed from the pond, her body was not in great shape because it had been in the water for quite some time, several days. I spoke with a couple of tow truck drivers who I trust quite a bit, and they told me that there is no way that a tow truck driver would be given access to engage that emergency brake because that car is considered a crime scene. Also, because the car was in the water for so long and it had been towed with Regina's body in it, that the condition of the body and the police would have never allowed it, nor would have the tow truck drivers wanted to reach into that car. Because the car was submerged, there's no reason to worry about the transmission in that car. The car was totaled, though it had no damage to it. I need a little help here. I know that there were a lot of people at the scene the day that Regina's car was towed out of that pond. I need you to reach out to me. I have a series of questions that I need to ask, and it's important that they're answered. I have had the assistance of quite a few people that I didn't expect the assistance of. And I am eternally grateful for that. They have put themselves at great risk. They have perhaps caused themselves to have to cut ties with family to be able to communicate with me. And that to me is incredible. Next week, I want to talk about some of the photos that I found in Lacella's stuff. She documented, like, Paul had destroyed Regina's house, and I had the police report for it, but I didn't have like actual photos. And as I was going through, these boxes of things, I found the photos. Lacella actually had them all titled and listed out specifically for when it occurred. Also, for some reason, there used to be these billboards outside of Willard that Lacella put up hoping to get justice and some answers for her daughter. I've investigated a case in the past that I felt like perhaps the family didn't do enough to locate or find answers for their child, or even though she was a grown child. And in this case, it's just so different. This woman tried so damn hard. She invested everything that she had into it. These are actual posters that she put up. I even have copies and copies of them from where she saved several of them. I want to show you them just so you can understand how hard this woman worked to find answers and justice for what happened to her only daughter. I want you to be aware that the rewards that are listed on here, because she had that reward up to $50,000 at one point, that the rewards on here are no longer active. So giving you the information is not going to allow you to get this reward. But this is one of them. And it's interesting because it looks a lot like this one. But I noticed on this one says this excludes any law enforcement officers. And I think the reason why she added that is because she was looking really hard into Ricky Sexton from Willard Police Department and if he had any potential involvement in what happened to Regina, or the fact that Regina's case remained open. This is another one. While these things are, for some reason, these ones are really hard for me to see, these posters and these flyers. I do keep another photo of Regina on my desk there from when she was little, but these ones are hard for me to look at, not just because she's gone, but because she clearly mattered a whole lot to people. And I'm a mother, and I can't fathom spending a decade plus wondering what happened to my child, wondering what the end of her life was like, and never seeing justice for what happened to her. You can actually still call that number down there at the bottom if you'd like, for the Huron County Sheriff's Department. This is part of their investigation and their case. But there are very few missing pieces that I have left here. So many people have been willing to talk to me, and a lot of them, for whatever reason, were never willing to talk to the police. They would be willing to talk to the police should I need them to. And I think that that's pretty incredible. But I really need help. From the day that Regina's car was taken out of the pond, if you could reach out to me, if you were there that day and you witnessed something, I'm looking for very specific information for a very specific reason. I believe that 23 years later, that we can finally get justice for Regina Rowe Hicks. And I've set this goal to have this case solved by her birthday next month. So if you could help me out in any way, I'd appreciate it. My phone number is 419-677-6608. You can reach out to me on Facebook. If you do reach out to me on Facebook, make sure you see the blue check next to my name. Additionally, you can email me. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit here. Remember a while back when I talked about that I got this random email and I believed it to be from Paul based on the email address that I gave to someone? I've since been provided with some screenshots that show the photo that was attached to that email with the exact documentation behind it. I now know 100% for a fact that that email originated from Paul's home. I know for a fact that the information in that email was meant and intended to perhaps lead me along a different path. Also, next week I'm going to play an audio for you. I had a woman reach out to me attempting to give me information about the woman suspect's previous husband, the one that she was blaming for the clothes being behind the washer. The woman that I was speaking with, the woman that said she was a suspect, that she said she had never spoken with Paul or Regina, and I found that to be a lie. She got a very distinct voice. And next week, I'm going to play this for you. I recorded the call when she called. Immediately, I was like, ooh, I recognize that voice. I'm going to play the audio for you. And I want you to see if you recognize that voice. I believe that if you grew up in Willard, a lot of you will recognize that voice. I believe that a lot of you, even though I'm not saying this woman's name for a reason, know who I'm talking about. If that woman talked to you about this case, if you know anything about what happened to Regina Rowe Hicks, I plead with you to reach out to me. If you're not going to reach out to me, reach out to law enforcement. This case remains open, and there's no reason with the volume of evidence that I've been able to uncover that this case should remain open. I believe that there's a very specific reason why this case is remaining open, and I don't like the bullshit, okay? I don't like the bullshit that is attached to this case. There is absolutely no reason why this case can't be solved if an ain't shit ass podcaster can gather this much evidence and this much information and put this many pieces into play without even having the records from the event. I appreciate everyone talking to me. I'll see you next week.